welcome to Keeping It Real. I'm Jay. I just wanted to come in and talk to you today about a phrase I keep hearing a lot in academia and other circles, and that is when it comes to Métis identity. It's the phrase that says it's not about who you claim, but who claims you. Now, the reality is, I have a problem with that. That's why I'm making a video. It's not about who you claim, but who claims you. And so in regards to identity, I think this is a real challenge. For instance, so if you have a Métis ancestor, which lots of us do, this statement that's being tossed around is the idea that it doesn't matter who your ancestors are. Having a Métis ancestor doesn't make you Métis, in so much as that any more than I do have some Scottish ancestry doesn't make me Scottish. Now, while I agree with that, in so much as that because I have Scottish ancestry and it goes back quite a ways that I can trace it, that doesn't make me any more a citizen of Scotland. I can't move there. I'm not going to get a passport. They're not going to recognize that it's been far too long since my ancestors lived in Scotland for me to be considered Scottish. But yet I do have a Scottish ancestry. And I think this applies somewhat to being Métis. Being Métis has to be more than simply you have Métis ancestry and claiming those ancestors. However, who claims you is a conundrum, I think, in the modern context, because the reality is most of our citizens of Métis nationhood live in urban centers. And so if you live in an urban center, are you really part of a historical Métis community? Who is claiming you as part of that community if you live in an urban center? I think that's a huge challenge. And the notion that you have to have a community claim you as part of it, I think is valid. The challenge I have is this notion of who claims you being then reduced further to what's in your wallet. Is it a membership card? So if you take out membership and qualify for membership within a certain organization, does that then, are they claiming you, and that then gives your identity credibility? I'm not sure about that. I think so that's a huge problem. Then you take into consideration how many communities have suffered trauma due to colonialism over the course of the last 150 years, how many communities have been forcibly removed and transported and otherwise, totally disbanded because of colonialism and usurping of Métis lands. So how could that community claim you? And so being claimed by a community in the modern sense, I think, is valid and it's important. I think it also has to have proper context to really be meaningful. Too many people claim Métis identity and want to stand up and be Métis, but aren't part of the greater community collective, and so they're isolated. And I think that's concerning, and it's adding to the disjointedness of our communities and our disrupting our way of life. How are you going to be part of the greater collective Métis experience and making sure that our ways and traditions and values are passed on to further future generations if you aren't plugged into a modern community? But that modern community has to be more than something that is a membership card that you take out and you wave around for some kind of validation or verification that your identity is more than your ancestors. And this is something that comes up often in conversation, is what is Métis identity? What is Métis culture in the modern age? We don't Voyager across the lakes anymore. We don't buffalo hunt anymore. Nobody wears their sash every day when they get out of bed. Very few people even wear moccasins as part of their everyday attire. So the reality is, what does it mean to be Métis in the present context, other than reducing it back to something that happened centuries ago? If you're, and that's the trouble. I'm at a loss. What is it? Because what is it when we get it together for Aboriginal Day? Is it when we put on special events to remember the way our ancestors lived? But then it's not a present and ever-living culture. It's something we do in remembrance of the way things used to be, and I think that's a bigger challenge in keeping our ways alive and keeping our traditions and our customs alive, especially in an urban center setting, is difficult. But it's a dialogue we need to have, because otherwise academia is quickly reducing this idea of identity down to who's claiming you. And that's an open-ended statement. If it's not about who you claim to be, and that's only half of the equation, and you can verify your Métis ancestry, and you can prove you have a valid heritage, and that's indeed where you come from, to then turn around and say that it's of equal weight, then whose community are you part of, and are you integrated to the degree that that could be verified, and that there's somebody there who could vouch for you, saying that you are a vibrant part of that community. I think these are valid points, and they're tough questions to answer, and it's not an easy conversation to have, because many people are isolated. Many people are like me, and you were adopted, and you're trying to reforge those connections and reconnect to that identity. And so there's trauma, there's pasts, and there's histories in there that need to be taken into consideration when we make these statements. But if we're going to keep the Métis way of life current and ongoing, then we have to be able to find ways to make our life interactive and our communities vibrant and engaging, so that our youth can be participatory in their in ongoing events. It can't be just delegated down to a couple special events a couple times a year. That's not what being Métis is. And this issue is even further compounded by the fact that we don't have lands. We don't live in our own communities on our own lands to have our own value systems and own traditional governances. The closest we can achieve, for the most part across Canada, is our organizations. But those organizations are not communities. That piece of plastic does not verify your Métis identity, and can't not replace that part of the statement that says that organization is claiming you, or somehow can claim you, to verify that identity. And I think that's the big challenge. Is there's a big push on for those communities to take, those organizations to take the place of communities through the membership role. I just don't think it's valid. Communities are people-based, they're relationship-based, and if you're not in relationship and then you're not in community, and no piece of plastic can replace that. And I think that's what we have to be very careful of in going forward. It's not who you claim, but it's who claims you. Is a dangerous statement. It's an open-ended statement. It's a vague statement that I think is being used to reduce people and marginalize people groups that have Métis ancestry and Métis community historical ties. And I think it's very insensitive to the past that many Métis people have suffered, and the traumas that they've gone through, and the very hard choices that they've had to make to get to here. And so as many people work to reforge that identity, to reclaim that past, it's about first and foremost claiming that identity, standing up and being proud to be Métis. It's about getting that garb, putting on that sash, and it is about going to those days and those events. That's where it starts. That's how you reforge your identity as a Métis person in reclaiming it. I think the next step, though, has to be, no matter where you are, no matter how isolated you are, you're never alone. There's always Métis people around. We've got all over the place, and we're just about in every town. So you need to work, if you're alone, to build that community. It has to be important to you to be part of a vibrant, ongoing community, so that we can keep our customs, our ways, and our traditions alive and vibrant, to pass down to the generations that come behind us. Until such time that we can work together to create a Métis land base and Métis recognition of our communities, then we can begin to work to have self-governance and more jurisdictional power over the things that enable us to enrich our lives to that ancestry. But until that time comes, it's really up to us to be able to reforge those communities. And I think that's where the statement has to be taken at face value. It's a challenge. If academia is going to say it's not who you claim, but who claims you, if you're like me, there isn't anybody here where I live. There isn't a community, and so you have to make one. And that's the challenge to us all, to make sure that we can pass on our identity and our Métis ancestry, that it doesn't end with us, or it doesn't become something that we just remember like Celtic days for all the people who are no longer connected to the European homelands or things like that. So I just want to come in and talk to you about that. I look forward to your comments. Hit the like button, subscribe. You can stay tuned for another episode of our podcast. The Jig is up on Podbean. Check us out there. We're on iTunes as well. So thanks for tuning in. I hope to hear from you and leave a comment. Until then, keep it real.